The phone rang at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, cutting through the quiet hum of my apartment like a blade. I almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers usually meant telemarketers or debt collectors for people who used to live here. But something made me pick up. "Is this Bella Morrison?" The voice was gravelly, older, with the weight of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's worst impulses. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Frank from Midtown Pawn. You're listed as the emergency contact for a Rolex Submariner, serial number." He rattled off a string of numbers that made my blood freeze. "We have some questions about a watch that was sold here a few days ago." My legs gave out. I sank into the kitchen chair, the phone trembling against my ear. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "Ma'am, according to our records, you're the rightful owner of this timepiece. But someone else brought it in and sold it. We need you to come down here immediately. There might have been some irregularities." The world tilted on its axis. Dad's watch. The only thing I had left of him, the one treasure I protected for 3 years since he passed. The watch that never left my jewelry box, locked away like the most precious relic. "That's impossible," I whispered. "The watch is in my apartment. It's been there since my father died." Frank's silence stretched long enough for me to understand that something was very, very wrong. "Ma'am, you need to check. And then you need to get down here." I ran to my bedroom, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the jewelry box key. The small velvet compartment where Dad's watch lived sat empty, like an open wound. Someone had stolen my father's soul. 3 years earlier. Time is the most honest thing in the universe, Bellabug. Dad's fingers traced the face of his Rolex as we sat on our back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. It doesn't lie, doesn't flatter, doesn't make excuses. It just keeps moving forward, 1 second at a time. I was 27 then, still reeling from a brutal breakup and feeling like my life was spiraling out of control. Dad had this way of making everything seem manageable, breakable into smaller, digestible pieces. "See this watch?" He unstrapped it from his wrist, the first time I'd ever seen him take it off voluntarily. "My father gave this to me when I graduated college. His father gave it to him when he came back from the war. For generations of Morrison men have worn this watch." The weight of it in my hands was substantial, meaningful. The steel was warm from his skin, and I could see the tiny scratches on the band from decades of daily wear. "Someday, this will be yours," he said, his voice soft but certain. "Not because you're my daughter, but because you understand what it means to keep going when everything else falls apart. You've got the Morrison resilience, kiddo." Dad wasn't a wealthy man. He was a high school history teacher who coached JV basketball on weekends. But he was rich in all the ways that mattered. He taught me that character wasn't something you inherited, it was something you built, decision by decision, day by day. When the cancer diagnosis came 6 months later, he faced it with the same steady courage he'd shown me my entire life. During chemo sessions, he'd tap the watch face and remind me, "Time keeps moving, Bellabug. We don't get to control how much we have, but we get to choose what we do with it." The last conversation we had was in his hospital room. He was weak, his skin paper thin, but his eyes were still sharp and full of love. "The watch," he whispered, pressing it into my palm. "Promise me you'll never give it away. Promise me you'll remember that no matter what happens, you've got time to make things right." I promised. God, how I promised. He died 12 hours later, holding my hand, the watch ticking steadily against my wrist like a heartbeat that refused to stop. For 3 years, that watch lived in my jewelry box. I couldn't bear to wear it daily, it felt too sacred, too precious. But sometimes, when the world felt like it was closing in, I'd hold it and listen to its rhythm, remembering Dad's voice and his unshakable faith in tomorrow. Now someone had taken that away from me. Mom remarried 8 months after Dad died. 8 months. I was still wearing black to family dinners, and she was picking out china patterns with Richard Hawthorne, a real estate developer with silver hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Life is for the living, Bella," she told me when I questioned the timing. "Your father wouldn't want me to be alone forever." Maybe that was true. Dad always wanted Mom to be happy. But what stung was how quickly she seemed to erase him from our lives, how eager she was to start fresh with Richard and his 28-year-old son, Jason. Jason Hawthorne was everything I wasn't: confident where I was cautious, charming where I was authentic, ambitious where I was content. He had his father's calculating eyes and an MBA from Wharton that he mentioned in approximately every conversation. Within 6 months of the wedding, he'd moved into my childhood bedroom and was calling my mother Mom, like he'd known her his entire life. The worst part wasn't Jason himself, it was how completely he captured my mother's attention and affection. She lit up when he walked into a room, hung on his every word about market trends and investment opportunities. She'd never looked at me that way, not even when I graduated magna cum laude or got promoted at the marketing firm. "Jason has such vision," she'd gush over family dinners in the house that used to be mine and Dad's. "He's going to revolutionize the tech consulting space. Did you know he's already secured preliminary investment commitments?" I'd nod and push food around my plate while Jason outlined his business plan with PowerPoint-level precision. He was starting a tech consulting firm that would disrupt traditional business models through innovative digital solutions. The kind of vague, ambitious language that impressed Richard and made my mother's eyes shine with pride. Meanwhile, my job at a mid-size marketing firm was nice, but not particularly noteworthy. My small apartment was charming, but not impressive. My single status was a source of gentle but persistent concern. "You know, Jason knows some lovely young professionals," Mom would suggest. "Perhaps we could arrange something." The message was clear: Jason was the golden child now, the son she'd always wanted. I was just the daughter she'd inherited from her first marriage, a reminder of a life she'd rather leave behind. It wasn't that Richard was cruel, he was actually quite pleasant in his distant, polite way. He asked about my work and remembered my birthday. But there was an unmistakable hierarchy in the new family structure, and I wasn't anywhere near the top. The real betrayal came during holiday gatherings, when Mom would pack away Dad's photos to make room for new family portraits. When she donated his books to charity without asking if I wanted them. When she had his home office converted into a gym because Jason needs a place to stay in shape for networking events. "You can't live in the past forever," she told me when I protested. "We have to make room for our new life." But erasing Dad's presence from the house felt like erasing him from our family entirely. Jason got the master treatment, the best room, the newest car when he needed transportation, first consideration for holiday plans. I got polite inclusion and barely concealed impatience when I brought up anything related to my father. The watch was the one thing they couldn't touch, the one piece of Dad that remained completely mine. I kept it in my apartment specifically to avoid these family dynamics, to preserve something sacred from the slow erosion of his memory. Or so I thought. The pawn shop was exactly what you'd expect: bulletproof glass, flickering fluorescent lights, and the desperate energy of people trading their most precious possessions for quick cash. Frank turned out to be a heavy-set man in his 60s with kind eyes and calloused hands. "Bella Morrison." He looked me up and down with the assessing gaze of someone who'd learned to read people quickly. "You look like hell, kid." "Someone stole my father's watch," I said, my voice barely steady. "I need to know who and I need to know how to get it back." Frank gestured for me to follow him behind the counter, where a small office held filing cabinets and a computer that looked older than Jason's college career. "Here's what I know," he said, pulling out a manila folder thick with paperwork. 3 days ago, a young man came in with a Rolex Submariner. Clean, well-dressed, confident. Said it was his grandfather's watch and he needed quick cash for a business opportunity. My chest tightened. "Did you get his name?" Jason Hawthorne. Had a driver's license and everything. But here's the thing, when I ran the serial number through our database, your name popped up as the registered owner. Apparently, your father had the watch properly documented with insurance papers that listed you as the beneficiary. Frank slid a photocopy of Jason's driver's license across the desk. There he was, smiling that confident smile, probably thinking he'd gotten away with the perfect crime. How much did you give him? I asked. $1,500. It's worth at least 5 times that, but pawn shops don't pay retail. He seemed happy with the amount. $1,500. Dad's most precious possession, the symbol of 4 generations of Morrison family history, sold for startup capital like a piece of junk jewelry. Where's the watch now? Frank's expression grew uncomfortable. That's the problem. Someone bought it yesterday. Cash sale, no return policy. I can give you the buyer's information, but getting it back is going to be complicated. The room spun slightly. Not only had Jason stolen Dad's watch, but it was already gone, sold to some stranger who had no idea of its significance. I need copies of everything, I said, my voice gaining strength as the shock wore off and anger took its place. The sale documents, Jason's ID, the buyer's information, security camera footage if you have it. Kid, I want to help you, but this is turning into a police matter. If the watch was stolen. It was stolen, I said firmly. And I'm going to prove it. The drive back to Mom's house, Richard's house now, I corrected myself, felt like riding toward a battlefield. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles went white, and I had to remind myself to breathe. I used my old key to let myself in, calling out as I entered. Mom. Are you home? She appeared from the kitchen, flour in her hair and an apron around her waist. Bella. What a lovely surprise. I was just making cookies for Jason's business meeting tomorrow. Of course she was. Where's Jason? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. He's at the office, preparing his presentation. The investors are very interested in his proposal. She beamed with maternal pride. Richard thinks he could secure funding by the end of the week. I followed her into the kitchen, where the smell of chocolate chip cookies should have been comforting but instead made me nauseous. Mom, I need to ask you something important. Has anyone been in my old room recently? She paused in her stirring, her expression becoming guarded. What do you mean? I mean, has Jason or anyone else gone through my things? Specifically the jewelry box on my old dresser. The silence stretched too long. Mom's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, recognition, and finally, something that looked like guilt. Bella, honey, you moved out 3 years ago. We've been using that room for storage, and Jason sometimes needs. Did you give him permission to go through my jewelry box? I interrupted. Why would you ask such a thing? Because Dad's watch is missing, and Jason sold it to a pawn shop 3 days ago for $1,500. The wooden spoon clattered to the floor. That's impossible, she whispered. Jason would never, he's not that kind of person. I have security footage from the pawn shop, Mom. I have a copy of his driver's license from the transaction. He told them it was his grandfather's watch and he needed quick cash for business. Mom sank into a kitchen chair, her face pale. There must be some mistake. The only mistake was trusting that my father's memory was safe in this house. She looked up at me with something I couldn't quite identify, shame, maybe, or the dawning realization that her perfect new son wasn't so perfect after all. What do you want me to do? She asked quietly. I want you to call Jason. I want him to come home right now. And I want him to explain how he's going to get my father's watch back. But even as I said it, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Jason wasn't going to confess and make it right. He was going to lie and manipulate and make me look like the crazy, vindictive stepsister who couldn't accept her new family. The war was just beginning. Jason arrived 40 minutes later, his BMW purring into the driveway like a satisfied cat. I watched from the living room window as he checked his reflection in the side mirror and straightened his tie before walking toward the house with that confident stride that used to impress me and now made my skin crawl. Bella. He entered with arms spread wide, as if I were his favorite person in the world. Mom said you wanted to see me. How are you doing, sis? The casual use of sis felt like a slap. We weren't siblings. We weren't even friends. We were strangers thrown together by our parents' marriage, and his pretense of family affection made everything worse. I'm doing terribly, actually, I said, standing up from the couch where I'd been pacing for the better part of an hour. Someone stole my father's watch and sold it to Midtown Pawn for $1,500. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Jason's expression shifted from false warmth to calculated confusion so quickly that anyone else might have missed it. But I'd been watching him perform for 3 years now, and I recognized his tells. Your father's watch. I don't understand. He looked at Mom, who was hovering in the kitchen doorway like she wanted to disappear entirely. What's she talking about? Don't play dumb, Jason. I pulled out the photocopy of his driver's license from the pawn shop. Frank at Midtown Pawn had some very interesting things to tell me about the well-dressed young man who came in 3 days ago with a Rolex Submariner. For just a moment, Jason's mask slipped. I saw a flash of something cold and calculating, a glimpse of who he really was beneath all that MBA polish. That's ridiculous, he said, but his voice was different now, sharper, more defensive. Why would I steal your father's watch? I barely even knew the man existed. The callousness of that statement hit me like a physical blow. His name was Thomas Morrison, and he was one of the best men who ever lived. I'm sure he was lovely, Jason said dismissively. But I didn't steal his watch. Then explain why the pawn shop has security footage of you selling it. Show me the footage. I will. In court if necessary. Jason laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're going to take me to court over a watch? Bella, honey, that's a bit dramatic, don't you think? Don't call me honey. And yes, I'll take you to court, to the police, to anyone who will listen. That watch meant everything to me. It's just a watch, he said, and I saw Mom wince at the harshness in his voice. It was my father's dying wish that I keep it safe. It was 4 generations of family history. It was, my voice cracked, and I hated that he could see how much he'd hurt me. Jason's expression softened, and for a moment I thought maybe he felt some genuine remorse. Then he spoke, and I realized he was just calculating his next move. Look, if someone really did steal your watch, we should call the police. Let them handle it properly. That's exactly what I plan to do. But Bella, Mom interjected, finally finding her voice. If we involve the police, think about what that could do to Jason's business prospects. If investors think he's involved in some kind of scandal. I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. Are you serious right now? Your stepson stole Dad's watch, and you're worried about his business reputation. We don't know that he stole anything, she said weakly. I know it, I said. And deep down, so do you. Jason stepped forward, and I caught a whiff of his expensive cologne mixed with something sharper, fear, maybe, or guilt. Bella, I understand you're upset about losing something that belonged to your father. But making wild accusations isn't going to bring it back. Maybe you should think about whether you're really ready for the kind of legal battle you're threatening. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Jason had resources, connections, a wealthy stepfather and a mother who would protect him. What did I have? A job at a mid-size marketing firm and a studio apartment with a broken air conditioner. But I also had something Jason didn't, the absolute certainty that I was right, and the Morrison stubbornness Dad had always said would either save me or get me into serious trouble. "We'll see about that," I said. Over the next week, I became a woman obsessed. I took time off work to scour Dad's old papers, looking for anything that might help establish my legal claim to the watch. I found the original receipt from when Grandpa Morrison bought it in 1962, the insurance documentation Dad had filed when he updated his policy, and a handwritten note in Dad's careful script that read, "For Bella, the only one who understands that time is precious because it's finite." I also found something else that made my blood boil, a copy of the deed to Mom's house, signed just 6 months after her marriage to Richard. Somehow, someway, the house that Dad had saved for years to buy, the house where I'd grown up, had been transferred entirely into Jason's name. The pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't just about a watch. This was about a systematic erasure of my father's legacy and my place in the family I thought I belonged to. I made an appointment with Patricia Nguyen, an estate attorney who specialized in family disputes. Her office was small but professional, filled with law books and family photos that reminded me of simpler times when I'd had a family that actually cared about me. "Tell me everything," Patricia said after I'd explained the basic situation. I laid out the timeline: Dad's death, Mom's quick remarriage, Jason's integration into the family, the gradual elimination of Dad's presence from the house, and finally, the theft of the watch. Patricia listened without interruption, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "The watch itself might be difficult to recover," she said when I'd finished. "If it was sold to a legitimate buyer, they have certain rights. But the theft is a criminal matter, and the transfer of the house deed, that's very interesting." "What do you mean?" "Your father died without a will." "He had a will." "Very simple, everything to Mom, with the understanding that I would inherit the house after she passed. But Mom says the will was just a formality, that they'd agreed she would make her own decisions about the property." Patricia frowned. "Do you have a copy of the original will?" "It should be in Dad's papers." I brought copies of everything I could find. She spent 20 minutes reviewing the documents I'd brought, her frown deepening as she read. "Bella, I think you may have a case here. The will specifically mentions the watch as a separate bequest to you. That means it was legally yours from the moment your father died, regardless of who had physical possession of it." My heart started beating faster. "You mean Jason really did commit theft?" "If he took it without your permission, yes. And the house situation is even more interesting. Your father's will doesn't give your mother unlimited power to dispose of his assets. The house was supposed to be held in trust for you. But she's been living there for 3 years. She had the right to live there. She didn't have the right to give it away." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of hope. "What do I need to do?" Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying me with the assessing look of someone who'd seen a lot of family ugliness over the years. "That depends on how far you're willing to go. We can file a police report about the watch, demand its return, and challenge the property transfer. But Bella, I need you to understand, this is going to get ugly. Your family is going to close ranks against you. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Dad, about his steady presence and his quiet strength. About the promises I'd made and the faith he'd placed in me. About Jason's smirk and Mom's willingness to choose her new family over her old one. "I'm prepared," I said. "Let's get my father's watch back." The police station smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Detective Rodriguez was a tired-looking woman in her 40s who'd clearly dealt with more family disputes than she cared to remember. "Let me get this straight," she said, reviewing my statement. "Your stepbrother sold your deceased father's watch to a pawn shop, and you have documentation proving ownership." "That's right. And the watch was taken from your childhood bedroom in your mother's house." "My mother's house that was supposed to be held in trust for me but was secretly transferred to my stepbrother 6 months ago." Detective Rodriguez looked up from her notes. That's a separate civil matter. For now, let's focus on the watch. You have the pawn shop documentation. I slid the folder across her desk. She reviewed the papers with the methodical thoroughness of someone who'd learned not to miss details. The good news is that this is pretty clear-cut theft, she said. The bad news is that getting the watch back is going to be complicated. We can arrest your stepbrother, but the current owner bought it in good faith from a licensed pawn shop. So even if Jason goes to jail, I might never see the watch again. There are legal mechanisms for recovering stolen property, but it takes time and money. How much are you willing to spend on this? Everything, I thought. But what I said was, whatever it takes. Detective Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Good. Because in my experience, people like your stepbrother don't stop at one crime. If he stole your watch and manipulated property deeds, there might be other financial irregularities. What do you mean? I mean we might want to look at his business finances, see if there's a pattern of creative problem solving when it comes to funding his ventures. The investigation moved faster than I'd expected. Jason was arrested on a Thursday morning at his temporary office space, right in the middle of a presentation to potential investors. According to Patricia, who had contacts in the prosecutor's office, he was released on bail within hours, but the damage to his business prospects was immediate and devastating. Mom called me that evening, her voice shaking with fury. How could you do this to him? She demanded. Jason is devastated. The investors pulled out, his reputation is ruined, and now there are reporters calling the house. He stole from me, Mom. It's a watch, Bella. A piece of metal and glass. Was it really worth destroying his future? The callousness of that statement took my breath away. It was Dad's watch. The last thing he gave me. And Jason didn't just steal it, he's been systematically erasing Dad from our family for 3 years. Your father is dead, she said harshly. Jason is alive, and he's my son now. He's not your son. I'm your daughter, and you've chosen him over me at every single turn. I've tried to build a new life. By destroying Dad's memory and stealing my inheritance. There was a long pause. When Mom spoke again, her voice was different, colder, more final. I think you should stay away from us for a while, Bella. Until you can learn to accept our family as it is. The line went dead. I sat staring at the phone, realizing that in trying to get justice for Dad, I'd lost my mother entirely. But 3 days later, Patricia called with news that made the pain worth it. We found the watch, she said. The buyer was a collector who follows news stories about stolen items. When he saw the article about Jason's arrest, he contacted the police voluntarily. I cried in Patricia's office, clutching the phone like a lifeline. When can I get it back? The prosecutor needs it as evidence until the trial, but after that. Bella, there's something else. The financial investigation turned up some very interesting information about Jason's business practices. Such as the fact that your mother's house was used as collateral for a business loan that Jason defaulted on. The bank is initiating foreclosure proceedings. The world tilted sideways. What does that mean? It means Jason didn't just steal your watch and your inheritance. He gambled with your mother's security and lost. She's about to lose her home because of his financial irresponsibility. Does she know? She's about to find out. The foreclosure notice was served on a Monday morning, delivered by a process server who found Mom watering her garden in the early morning light. She called me 12 hours later, her voice small and broken in a way I'd never heard before. Bella. I need help. Part of me wanted to hang up. Part of me wanted to let her face the consequences of choosing Jason over her own daughter. But the larger part of me, the part that Dad had raised to be better than my worst impulses, couldn't abandon my mother, no matter what she'd done to me. "I'll be right over," I said. The trial was set for October 15th, exactly 4 years after Dad's death. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. It felt like he was somehow orchestrating this final confrontation from beyond the grave, demanding that his memory be honored and his daughter be protected. Jason showed up to court in an expensive suit that couldn't hide the fact that he looked haggard and desperate. His business had collapsed entirely after his arrest, and according to Patricia's sources, Richard had cut off his financial support in fury over the foreclosure situation. He bet everything on that tech consulting venture, Patricia explained as we waited for proceedings to begin. Used the house as collateral, spent the investors' preliminary money before the deal was finalized, and when it all fell apart, he tried to cover his losses with whatever he could get his hands on. Including Dad's watch. Including your watch, yes. The prosecution has a strong case: theft, fraud, identity theft for using your mother's property without authorization. Jason's looking at serious jail time. Mom sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, looking small and lost between Richard and their expensive attorney. She hadn't spoken to me since the day she called for help, but I'd worked with Patricia to ensure she wouldn't lose the house entirely. We'd negotiated with the bank to establish a payment plan that would allow her to keep her home, with the understanding that ownership would revert to me as Dad's heir. It was more than she deserved, but it was what Dad would have wanted. When my turn came to testify, I stood at the witness stand holding Dad's watch, finally returned to me after months in evidence, and told the story of what it meant to our family. For generations of Morrison men wore this watch, I said, my voice steady despite the tears in my eyes. My great-grandfather wore it when he came back from World War II. My grandfather wore it when he built his construction business from nothing. My father wore it every single day for 30 years, through good times and bad, through my childhood and my teenage rebellion and his fight with cancer. I looked directly at Jason as I continued. When my father was dying, he made me promise to keep this watch safe. He said it represented something precious, the idea that time is finite, that every moment matters, that we should spend our lives building something worth leaving behind. Jason's attorney objected to the emotional testimony, but Judge Harrison overruled him. The defendant chose to steal something of immense sentimental value, she said. The victim has the right to explain what he took from her. I continued my testimony, describing not just the theft of the watch but the systematic erasure of Dad's memory from our family home, the manipulation of legal documents, the betrayal of trust that had left my mother facing foreclosure and me fighting for my inheritance. When I finished, the courtroom was silent except for the quiet sound of someone crying. I looked over and saw that it was Mom, her face buried in her hands while Richard sat stiffly beside her. Jason's defense was predictable. He claimed he'd found the watch in a box of old items that Mom had given him permission to dispose of. He insisted he had no idea it belonged to me specifically, that he thought it was just another piece of estate jewelry that the family no longer wanted. But Patricia had done her homework. She presented evidence of Jason's internet searches about the watch's value, his research into pawn shops and their policies, his careful timing of the sale to coincide with a business loan payment deadline. This wasn't a misunderstanding, she told the jury during closing arguments. This was a calculated theft by a man who was willing to steal from his stepsister's grief to fund his failing business ventures. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts, the forewoman announced. Jason's face went white. Mom let out a sound like a wounded animal. Richard stared straight ahead like he was watching his own funeral. Judge Harrison sentenced Jason to 18 months in prison and ordered him to pay full restitution for the watch's appraised value, plus damages for the fraudulent property transfer and associated legal costs. Mr. Hawthorne, she said before passing sentence, you didn't just steal a watch. You stole memories, you stole trust, and you stole your family's security for your own selfish purposes. That level of betrayal deserves consequences. As the bailiff led Jason away in handcuffs, he looked at me one last time. There was no remorse in his expression, no acknowledgement of what he'd done. Just cold fury that he'd been caught and held accountable. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a bone-deep weariness and the knowledge that justice, while necessary, couldn't undo the damage that had been done to our family. Mom approached me as I was leaving the courthouse, her face streaked with tears and aged beyond her years. "Bella," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." I stopped walking and turned to face her, this woman who had given birth to me and raised me and ultimately chosen someone else's child over her own. "Are you sorry that Jason stole from me, or are you sorry that he got caught?" She flinched at the harshness in my voice, but I needed to know. After everything that had happened, I needed to understand where we stood. "I'm sorry for all of it," she whispered. "I'm sorry I let Richard and Jason convince me that moving forward meant forgetting your father. I'm sorry I didn't protect the things that mattered to you. I'm sorry I chose a fantasy of a perfect new family over the daughter who was right there in front of me. It was more accountability than I'd expected, but it came too late to fix what had been broken between us. I know you're sorry, Mom. But sorry doesn't bring back 3 years of feeling like an outsider in my own family. Sorry doesn't undo the pain of watching you erase Dad from the house he loved. Sorry doesn't change the fact that when I needed my mother to believe me, you chose to protect the person who was stealing from me." "I know," she said. "I know I can't fix it. But Bella, you're all I have left now. Richard filed for divorce last week. He says he can't trust me anymore, that I should have known what Jason was doing." I felt a pang of sympathy for her, abandoned by the new family she'd sacrificed everything to join. But I also felt the protective wariness that had kept me sane through the darkest parts of this ordeal. "I'm not your backup plan, Mom. I'm not the consolation prize you settle for when everyone else disappoints you. That's not what I meant." "Yes, it is. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I don't need to be anyone's first choice anymore. I just need to honor Dad's memory and build a life that would make him proud." I walked away from her then, not in anger but in acceptance. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some relationships, once poisoned, can't be healed with apologies and good intentions. But some promises can still be kept. 1 year later. I opened Morrison Time and Memory on a crisp October morning, exactly 5 years after Dad died. The shop was small, just a storefront in the arts district downtown, but it was mine entirely. I'd used the restitution money from Jason's conviction as a down payment, and I'd spent months learning the intricate art of watch repair from an elderly craftsman named Henri who'd immigrated from Switzerland in the 1960s. "Time is the only thing we truly own," Henri had told me during my apprenticeship. "When someone brings me their grandfather's watch, their wedding gift from their spouse, their father's last present, they're trusting me with their memories. It's sacred work." The front window displayed a carefully curated collection of vintage timepieces, but the real heart of the business was in the back room where I spent my days bent over tiny gears and springs, bringing broken watches back to life. Dad's Rolex sat on my workbench every day, not being repaired. It had never stopped running, but serving as a reminder of why I was there. Sometimes customers would notice it and ask if it was for sale. "That one's not going anywhere," I'd tell them with a smile. "It's got a job to do." The job was remembering. Remembering that time is precious, that promises matter, that some things are worth fighting for even when everyone tells you to let them go. Business was steady if not spectacular. I specialized in family heirlooms and estate pieces, watches that carried stories more valuable than their monetary worth. There was Mrs. Chin, who brought in her late husband's pocket watch that had stopped the day he died. There was Marcus, a young father who wanted his grandfather's military-issued timepiece restored for his son's graduation. There was Sarah, whose grandmother's delicate gold watch had been damaged in a house fire, along with most of her family photos. Each repair was a meditation on memory and loss, on the things we choose to preserve and the stories we tell ourselves about why they matter. I found peace in the precision of the work, in the satisfaction of taking something broken and making it whole again. 6 months after opening, I started a small charity initiative called A Time Remembered, free repairs for military families, survivors of domestic violence, and anyone who'd lost someone and needed their loved ones watch working again but couldn't afford the cost. Time heals all wounds, I'd write in the little cards I included with each completed repair, but sometimes it needs a little help getting started again. The program attracted local media attention, which led to more customers, which allowed me to expand the charity work. It was a virtuous cycle that Dad would have loved, success built on helping others, prosperity rooted in compassion. I was closing up shop on a Thursday evening in March when I saw a familiar figure standing outside the window, studying the display with the focused attention of someone who was genuinely interested rather than just browsing. It was Mom. She looked older than her 62 years, her hair more gray than brown now, her face lined with what I recognized as the particular exhaustion that comes from spending too much energy on regret. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of the designer clothes that had been her uniform during her marriage to Richard. I unlocked the door and stepped outside. "How long have you been standing there?" I asked. "About 20 minutes, she admitted. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me." "I'm not sure either," I said honestly. "But you're here, so, do you want to come in?" She followed me back into the shop, her eyes taking in every detail, the restored vintage watches in their cases, the comfortable reading chair where customers could wait while I worked, the framed photo of Dad that sat on the counter next to my business cards. "It's beautiful, Bella," she said softly. "Your father would be so proud." "Would he?" I asked. "Or would he be disappointed that it took his death and a family war for me to find my calling?" Mom was quiet for a long moment, studying Dad's picture. "He always said you had more strength than you realized," she finally said. "He used to tell me that someday something would happen that would force you to discover how resilient you really were. I don't think he imagined it would be me who provided that test." I moved behind the counter, needing some physical barrier between us. "What do you want, Mom?" "I want to apologize. Really apologize, not just say I'm sorry and hope it fixes everything. I want you to understand that I know what I did was wrong." "Which part?" "Choosing Jason over me. Helping him erase Dad from the house. Refusing to believe he stole from me. There are so many things to choose from." She winced but didn't look away. "All of it. Every single choice I made after your father died was motivated by fear instead of love. I was terrified of being alone, terrified of facing my grief, terrified of raising you by myself. So you found a replacement family and pretended the old one never existed." "Yes." The admission was stark, unqualified. I convinced myself that moving forward meant moving away from everything that reminded me of Tom. Including the parts of you that were most like him. And when Jason started taking advantage of your willingness to forget, I let him because it was easier than admitting I'd made a mistake. Easier than acknowledging that no amount of new family was going to fill the hole your father left behind. I looked down at Dad's watch on my wrist. I'd started wearing it every day since opening the shop, finally ready to carry his memory with me instead of keeping it locked away. "You hurt me in ways I'm still discovering, Mom. You made me feel like I was crazy for wanting to preserve Dad's memory. You made me feel like I was the problem for not embracing your new family fast enough or completely enough. I know. And when I finally stood up for myself, when I finally said enough was enough, you abandoned me entirely. I know. So what are you doing here? What do you want from me now?" Mom pulled a small jewelry box from her purse and set it on the counter between us. Inside was her wedding ring, not the one from Richard, but the simple gold band Dad had given her 33 years ago. "I want to give you this," she said. "I know it doesn't make up for anything, and I know you might not want it. But I thought maybe someday, when you're ready, you might want to have it." I stared at the ring, remembering how proud Dad had been when he'd finally saved enough to buy it, how Mom had cried when he proposed, how she'd worn it every day until the week before she married Richard. "Why now?" I asked. "Because I'm dying," she said simply. The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, probably less." I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. "When did you find out?" 3 weeks ago. "I've been trying to decide whether to tell you, whether I had the right to ask for forgiveness when it's too late to make amends." The shop felt too small suddenly, too quiet except for the ticking of dozens of watches marking time that was slipping away faster than I could process. "I don't know what you want me to say," I whispered. "I don't want you to say anything. I just wanted you to know that losing your trust and your love was the biggest mistake of my life. Bigger than marrying Richard, bigger than letting Jason manipulate me, bigger than any of it." She closed the jewelry box and pushed it toward me. "Keep this or throw it away, whatever feels right. But know that every day for the past year, I've looked at it and remembered what real love actually looked like." I picked up the box, feeling the weight of it in my palm. Such a small thing to carry so much history, so much pain, so much hope. "Are you alone?" I asked. "Yes. Richard moved to Florida after the divorce. Jason gets out of prison next month, but we don't speak anymore." I thought about Dad, about the man who taught me that forgiveness wasn't something you did for other people but something you did for yourself. About the promise I'd made to honor his memory not just by keeping his watch safe, but by living according to the values he'd tried to instill in me. "You don't have to be alone," I said quietly. Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Bella, you don't owe me anything. Especially not after. I'm not doing it because I owe you. I'm doing it because Dad would want me to. Because despite everything that's happened, you're still my mother." She cried then, silently but completely, years of grief and regret and fear flowing out of her like water from a broken dam. "I don't deserve your kindness," she said. "Probably not," I agreed. "But Dad always said that love isn't about what people deserve. It's about who we choose to be when someone needs us." We spent the next 4 months rebuilding something that wasn't quite the relationship we'd had before. Too much damage had been done for that, but something new and honest and grounded in the reality of who we actually were rather than who we wished we could be. I closed the shop early twice a week to take Mom to her chemotherapy appointments. We didn't talk much during those long hours in the treatment center, but we sat together, and that felt like a start. She told me stories about Dad that I'd never heard, about their first date, about the night I was born, about the dreams they'd shared for their future before cancer cut it short. I told her about the shop, about the customers whose stories touched me, about the peace I'd found in work that honored memory instead of running from it. On good days, she'd come to the shop and sit in the customer chair while I worked, content to listen to the ticking of the clocks and watch me restore other people's treasures. On bad days, I'd bring her soup and books and sit with her while she slept, Dad's watch on my wrist marking the precious, finite time we had left. She died on a Tuesday morning in July, holding my hand while the hospice nurse checked her vitals one final time. Her last words were, "Tell your father I kept my promise," though I never found out what promise she meant. I buried her next to Dad in Greenwood Cemetery, under a simple headstone that read, "Margaret Morrison, beloved wife and mother, finally home." At the funeral, fewer than a dozen people came. A couple of her old work friends, some neighbors, Patricia and Gwyn, and surprisingly, Henri from the watch repair shop where I'd learned my trade. "She came to see me last month," he explained after the service. "Wanted to have her wedding ring resized so it would fit you properly when the time came. She said it was the most important repair she'd ever commissioned." I looked down at the ring on my right hand. I wasn't ready to wear it on my left yet, but I'd wanted to have it with me for the funeral. It fit perfectly. Jason didn't come. I hadn't expected him to, hadn't even sent him notice of Mom's death. Some relationships don't survive their own toxicity, and his absence felt like a final, necessary ending to that chapter of family drama. Richard sent flowers but didn't attend. The card read simply, "My condolences," as if Mom had been a distant acquaintance rather than someone he'd shared 5 years of his life with. It was exactly the kind of funeral Dad would have hated, small, sad, defined more by who wasn't there than by who was. But it was honest, and I thought maybe that counted for something. 2 years later. I'm writing this story on the 7th anniversary of Dad's death, sitting in my shop after hours with his watch on my wrist and Mom's ring on my finger and the sound of 23 vintage timepieces marking the seconds as they pass. Business has grown beyond anything I could have imagined. Time Remembered now serves families across 3 states, and I've trained 2 apprentices to help with the workload. We're booked solid through Christmas, mostly with people who want family heirlooms restored in time for holiday gift-giving. Last month, a woman brought in a pocket watch that belonged to her great-grandfather, a railroad man who'd carried it for 40 years of faithful service. The movement had seized up decades ago, and everyone told her it was beyond repair. "I don't care what it costs," she said, tears in her eyes. "It's the only thing I have left of him." It took me 6 weeks of patient work, tracking down original parts and carefully rebuilding the mechanism piece by piece. When I finally got it running again, the sound it made was pure music, steady, strong, reliable. The woman cried when I placed it in her hands, feeling it tick against her palm like a heartbeat that had been waiting 70 years to resume. "How can I ever thank you?" she asked. "By telling someone the story," I said. "By making sure the memory lives on. That's what this shop is really about, what this whole journey has been about, making sure the memories live on. Not just the happy ones, but all of them. The love and the loss, the betrayal and the forgiveness, the promises kept and the ones that were broken." Jason got out of prison 18 months ago. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he moved to Phoenix and is working as a used car salesman. He never contacted me, never apologized, never acknowledged what he'd taken from our family. I hope he's found some measure of peace, but I don't need his remorse to feel complete. Some people aren't capable of the kind of accountability that makes reconciliation possible, and that's their loss, not mine. Richard remarried last year, a widow from his country club who appreciates his stability and doesn't ask complicated questions about his past. I'm happy for them both. Everyone deserves love, even people who've made mistakes. I've been seeing someone for the past 6 months, Daniel, a librarian who collects vintage fountain pens and understands the importance of preserving things that matter. He's patient with my complicated relationship with time, respectful of the space I need to honor Dad's memory, and wise enough not to compete with ghosts. "You're not looking for someone to replace your father," he told me after I'd explained why I was so protective of Dad's legacy. "You're looking for someone who understands why he was irreplaceable." Daniel gets it. He gets me. And maybe someday, when I'm ready, I'll move Mom's ring to my left hand and start building new memories alongside the old ones. But not yet. For now, I'm content with the life I've built from the ashes of my family's implosion, a life centered on craftsmanship and service, on helping other people preserve their most precious memories. Every morning when I open the shop, I touch Dad's watch and remember his voice. Time is the most honest thing in the universe, Bella Bug. It doesn't lie, doesn't flatter, doesn't make excuses. It just keeps moving forward, 1 second at a time. He was right about that. Time kept moving forward even when I wanted it to stop, even when I tried to hold on to moments that were already slipping away, even when it felt like the world was ending and nothing would ever be okay again. But he was wrong about one thing. Time doesn't heal all wounds. Some hurts are too deep, some betrayals too complete for the simple passage of days and months to fix them. What time does is teach you to carry your wounds with dignity, to build strength from surviving them, to find meaning in the struggle to keep going when everything falls apart. I learned that Jason was right about one thing. Dad's watch is just a piece of metal and glass. But he was wrong about what that means. Being just a physical object doesn't make it meaningless. It makes it miraculous. How incredible is it that humans can pour so much love into a simple collection of gears and springs that it becomes sacred? How amazing that we can look at a ticking piece of machinery and see our father's values, our family's history, our own commitment to keeping promises that matter. The watch didn't save me from losing my family, didn't protect me from betrayal, didn't prevent the pain of discovering how conditional some people's love really is. What it did was remind me who I was when everything else was stripped away. It anchored me to Dad's values when the people around me had abandoned theirs. It gave me something worth fighting for when it would have been easier to surrender. And in the end, fighting for it led me to something I never could have imagined, a career that feeds my soul, a sense of purpose that gets me up every morning, a way to honor Dad's memory by serving others who understand the weight of loss. I look at the watch now, 7 years after Dad's death and 2 years after Mom's, and I can almost hear his voice echoing across time. Truth is the only thing that always comes full circle, Bellabug. It might take years, it might cost you everything, but it always comes back around. He was right about that too. The truth came full circle, and it brought justice with it. Not the kind of justice that feels satisfying or complete, but the kind that allows you to sleep at night knowing you did the right thing even when it was hard. The watch ticks steadily against my wrist, marking seconds and minutes and hours of a life rebuilt from loss. Tomorrow I'll open the shop again, and someone will bring me their grandfather's timepiece or their mother's jewelry or their spouse's anniversary gift, and I'll work to bring it back to life. Because that's what we do, those of us who understand that some things are worth preserving. We keep the promises. We tell the stories. We make sure the love survives, even when the people don't. Time keeps moving forward, 1 second at a time. And so do we.